Impact, true. Political intent, probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
Former President Trump pleads not guilty to 34 felonies.
Today, American politics crosses a line that it's never going to come back from.
USA! USA!
But others say no one is above the law.
We've been waiting for 6 long years for him to finally face justice for something.
What the prosecution is going to have to show is that the former president formed the intent to commit or conceal another crime.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns. Thank you for joining us. History was made this afternoon in New York City with the first ever criminal arraignment of a former U.S. president. Former President Trump pleaded not guilty to 34 criminal counts, including felony charges of falsifying business records. The charges were handed down by a grand jury convened by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Bragg's office investigated the circumstances surrounding a payment made on Trump's behalf to actor Stormy Daniels in 2016 in exchange for her silence about an alleged affair. Here is some of what Bragg said after the arraignment hearing.
34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
Well, we have full team coverage tonight. In New York City, we have our chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes, here with me on set. We have senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge and investigative reporter Graham Cates outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. And in West Palm Beach, Florida, where Donald Trump is expected to go next, CBS News chief White House correspondent, Chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett. Thank you all for being here. Graham and Catherine, I want to go to you. Catherine, set the scene outside the courthouse for us. I know you've been standing outside it all day.
Well, Caitlin, good to be with you from outside the courthouse. Earlier today, there was a tremendous sense of tension, kind of a combination of anticipation and then also apprehension as history was about to unfold. This was a meticulous security operation. Some of the security, and I've worked in this space for 2 decades, was highly visible. That is by design to be a deterrent, and some of it was not visible, but my trained eye could see several plainclothes police officers moving through the crowd, and they also had members of something called a TACU. This is a Tactical Assistance Unit. They put up these fixed sky cameras for surveillance, largely for crowd control, property damage, and most importantly, to identify emerging threats so that the NYPD federal law enforcement could have that surge capability. But I think most of us are very pleased to report that the day went very smoothly. There was a protest just about 25 yards from where Graham and I are standing right now. There was a barricade down the middle separating the pro-Trump and then the anti-Trump protesters, but there was really no violence, sort of no confrontation to speak of. And I'm just going to hand it over to Graham. Maybe you can bring us in on sort of the movements inside the courtroom.
Inside the courtroom was an entirely different atmosphere. It was very quiet before former President Trump came in. Everyone was waiting for just this one hearing. The reporters were led in first before pretty much anyone in the courtroom. About 60 of us surrounded by court officers and Secret Service agents who lined this kind of middle row where defendants walk down, and then we're all along the walls. This is a really old building. There's like paint peeling from the ceilings. It's really never had a circumstance like this before. And then after about 45 minutes, with very little fanfare, there came several of Trump's lawyers, and with them, Donald Trump himself. He didn't say a word as he walked in. He kind of pursed his lips and didn't make any faces and stared straight ahead and walked and sat down in a chair where thousands of criminal defendants have sat before him. But in this case, the criminal defendant was the former president of the United States.
And Graham, that courtroom that you are describing, of course, is a far cry from Mar-a-Lago, where the former president is now headed to give a campaign speech tonight. That's where Major Garrett is. Major, it was striking today to obviously see that image of the president in the courtroom, but also the image that his campaign put out today, this fake mugshot, and trying to fundraise around this. Tell us a little bit about what that says about the state of his campaign, what they are hoping to get out of this, and what we may expect to hear about this tonight. There was no gag order issued.
Correct. There's lots of things to talk about, Caitlin. Good evening, everyone, from Mar-a-Lago, the ballroom, where at about 8 o'clock Eastern tonight, the former president will give remarks about this history-making moment. And it is a momentous moment for all of American history. But as Graham indicated, there was something about it that was also mundane and highly procedural and formal in that New York courtroom. That's as it should be. The president's not above the law, he's not beneath the law, as many people have observed. And the law and his ability to assert his innocence and all of his due process rights have been respected on this day and will be respected going forward. And the former president's deportment today, I think, is also reflective of the two worlds in which this story and the former president's attitude about it exists simultaneously. The one world is the world of legal reality. And I know from my reporting and from Robert Costa's reporting that the president's attorneys have counseled him to dial it back, at least personally, not on social media, but personally, to treat this with due seriousness, to look as if he's taking it seriously. The political side of Donald Trump and the Donald Trump universe wants to monetize this moment. And as soon as he entered the courthouse, or almost as soon as he entered the courthouse, boom, there was an email sent out to supporters requesting donations, $47. You can do the math on that. He's the 45th president. Joe Biden is the 46th. If he's reelected, he would be 47. What do you get for your $47? You get a T-shirt that says it's the mugshot of the former president. It's not the mugshot. No mugshot was taken. It is a fake photo. It is a head fake, if you will, generated by the campaign to stir up immediate donations for the campaign and for whatever attendant legal fees might arise from this or other cases. So those are the ways in which Donald Trump, the person, the former president, his legal team, and his campaign arm exist and actually are trying to coexist in this historic moment.
And Nancy, the former president's he hopes, opponent is Joe Biden, the president. And it has been such a split screen this week to see Biden, out on the road, going about the presidency. He seems to not be commenting on what we're seeing unfold in Manhattan.
Not at all. In fact, he had another opportunity today. Reporters tried to ask him about it. They tried to ask the vice president about it. She had nothing to say either. The press secretary, the White House press secretary, was peppered with questions. She also punted, said this is a legal matter. We don't want to get involved. The White House doesn't want to do anything to step on what they believe is a very bad moment, ultimately, for Donald Trump. And it was interesting to see Democrats following suit. I mean, typically, you would anticipate the Democrats on Capitol Hill would be gloating. They would be doing a victory lap about this. Here is probably President Biden's most likely opponent in 2024, and yet Chuck Schumer, the leader in the Senate, who is not known for pulling punches, put out a 2-sentence statement. He's also the senator from New York, by the way. Very milquetoast. I believe that Mr. Trump will have a fair trial that follows the facts and the law. Ho-hum. Clearly, they don't want to take any risk of becoming part of this story when they think Donald Trump's doing a great job all by himself.
That's so fascinating about Schumer, because obviously he's known for not pulling back there.
He's a New York brawler when he wants to be.
Exactly. Kind of staying in New York, Graham, I'm curious about why there was no gag order issued here.
So this was interesting. The judge said that generally he's not inclined to issue gag orders because he wants to protect the First Amendment rights of defendants, but he said that this was particularly important in this case, that he was cognizant of the fact that the defendant sitting before him was a candidate for president of the United States, and he didn't want to, in particular in this case, suppress the candidate's First Amendment rights. But he also said, you know, this is something we can revisit if it becomes an issue. At least for now, though, they are not going to issue a gag order.
And Catherine, what are we hearing from Trump's legal defense? They spoke after the arraignment today.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Caitlin. We heard from this new attorney, Todd Blanche. I spoke with a lawyer last evening who has worked with him in the past and described him as someone who was a very fierce, white-collar criminal attorney, very much on the offense, forward-leaning, not afraid to sort of wade into a difficult fight. And he thought his view in this case is that the indictment was overreach. Blanche told reporters as he left the courthouse behind us that his client, the former president, was frustrated. He was digesting this indictment, but he would fight on. What we've heard consistently from members of the Trump legal team, albeit they are working other cases, specifically the classified documents case at Mar-a-Lago, is that they wanted to review this indictment, Caitlin, to see if there was what they described as a fatal legal flaw. And it has to do with something called the intent to defraud. What they told CBS News is that in order to obtain a conviction, the prosecutor here would have to show that it was not only an intent to deceive somebody, but it was an intent to defraud where something of value like property or cash was denied an individual or an entity. We got a little bit of insight into that today from Alvin Bragg at that press conference where he talked about tax issues here in New York. Maybe that is what he's hanging the intent to defraud on, but we know the Trump attorneys are going to look at that very aggressively. There was another case involving this very same New York statute, and it went up to the Supreme Court, and the conviction was ultimately tossed out because it was found the prosecution had not shown that something of value had been denied as a result of the action.
I mean, that's interesting. Kind of going to what you were saying earlier, Major, I think it's kind of important to remind our audience that this is just one of a handful of investigations into the former president right now. I know you have been talking to people in his orbit. How concerned are they about these other investigations that could unfold?
So let's go through the investigations that are not based in Manhattan. One is in Fulton County, Georgia. That is a grand jury. A special grand jury was impaneled. Another grand jury will look at the underlying evidence presented to that special grand jury about whether or not there was activity that implicates a crime involving the former president and trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election result in Georgia. Then there is the special counsel's investigation in Washington, D.C., also where a grand jury is involved, investigating two matters. The handling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, where I am right now, after Mr. Trump left office, and his activities before and during January 6th. Are there criminal implications to either of those cases? Was there obstruction of justice? Was there mishandling of documents? Did the president knowingly tell the country that the election was stolen when he knew it wasn't, and all the, therefore, activities, including a riot on Capitol Hill, therefore emanate from that knowledge and that motive? All those questions hang out in the air. What did the president know? What did he do? And what was his knowledge of the underlying facts? All of those investigations present real legal jeopardy for the former president, and his inner circle knows that. If they were to rank for you, Caitlin, and the country, their level of concern, it would be Manhattan DA case 4, Fulton County 3, then January 6 classified documents 1 and 2.
A lot to still unfold as we go forward. Major Garrett, Nancy Cordes, Catherine Herridge, and Graham Cates, thank you all so much. There has been a lot of speculation about the impact that today's arraignment could have on the 2024 presidential race. We'll ask a Democrat and a Republican strategist next. You're streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
Hey there, welcome to the Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today. I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And there becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. How Trump's arraignment today affects his run to regain the presidency in 2024 will be a hotly debated topic in coming days and months. Here to discuss it all is Ashley Etienne and Justin Safey. They join us now. Ashley is a CBS News political contributor and the former communications director for both Vice President Kamala Harris and then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. Justin has served in the administrations of 3 Republican presidents and is a Florida-based Republican consultant. And Justin, I want to start with you because we saw Trump fundraising off of this arraignment today. His campaign claiming about $7 million so far has been raised. That's according to the campaign. Is this really a boon to his campaign the way that he thinks it could be?
In the short term, absolutely. I'm sure they're raising a lot of money. We have to take the campaign at its word for now that that's the amount that they're raising. But there are a lot of Republicans around the country that view this as a purely political prosecution. You even had former Governor Jeb Bush, an opponent of Donald Trump's in 2016, certainly no Trump fan, calling it a political prosecution. So there are a lot of Republicans around the country that see it that way. Short term, definitely a boost for him.
Ashley, I want to pick up on that point because I'm curious how Democrats are looking at this today. I mean, is there any concern among Democrats that this could, in fact, help him in terms of rallying around his base and getting Republicans, to Justin's point, even Jeb Bush, coming to his defense, at least in this instance?
Well, I'll just say this. There's not many Republicans in elected office and not in elected office that have credibility on this particular issue. I mean, too many of them have really abandoned our American principles in support of blind support of Donald Trump. Here's the thing is, you know, this is a moment in time, but I think what really should give the Republicans heartburn, especially as they look to 2024, is the poll that came out of CNN that found that 62% of independents support the indictment. As you know, that's the difference in any election that can swing an election, independent voters. That is the sweet spot for both Democrats and Republicans. So as we look at this, Democrats and Republicans have hardened, but it's that independent bloc that actually supports the indictment of Donald Trump. And I think that should be giving Republicans heartburn as they look to the next election.
Well, that bloc, of course, so critical in a general election. Right now, Republicans are trying to figure out the primary election, but certainly wanting to win a general election has to be at the top of their minds. I mean, Justin, what's been the reaction from other Republican rivals? They also seem to be coming to Trump's defense here, but is there any way that they could distance themselves from some of this today?
Again, I think in the short term, you're going to see a very different response than what you might see in the long term. Short term, they're all going to say this is political. They're going to criticize the prosecutor for bringing these charges against the former president. Long term, different story. We're in early April of 2023. Voters won't start going to the polls to select the nominee of the party until early next year. So we're a long way away from people actually casting ballots. Let's wait until we have a full field, and then you'll see what truly this impact will have in the course of the presidential campaign.
And what about the uncertainty of some of these other investigations going on here? I mean, in this instance, Republicans are rallying around him, but there are other investigations to go. To your point, the field is still shaking itself out. But, the gloves haven't really come off. We haven't really seen Republicans take aim at Donald Trump.
Well, I think that's a great point. This case, I think most legal experts would say this was the weakest of the 4 ongoing investigations into former President Trump. So, no one really knows what's going to happen with those other investigations. But there could be a scenario if these other investigations turn into prosecutions. Former President Trump is a master at turning adversity into an advantage. So anyone who thinks that, as hard as it is to believe, that these other prosecutions, especially if they come from the Biden Justice Department, will be a net negative for him, I think it's a huge X factor. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that even more indictments will necessarily be damaging to President Trump, especially if they come from the Biden Justice Department.
It's very interesting. I mean, we have so much longer to go. Ashley, I mean, to that point about Biden, he's just been letting this play out. He's not getting engaged, as Nancy pointed out earlier. They're just waiting to see how this plays out and letting this play out. What does that tell you about kind of how Democrats are playing this? Is that the strategy, or do you expect them to start to weigh in a bit more?
Well, I mean, I think, Trump does his own damage. So, I think the president's smart to just stay out of the way of Trump and let this story run its actual course. But, here's the thing I think where Democrats are feeling sort of encouraged is that this moment just reminds the American public of what they get with Donald Trump. Let's not forget that this was the president who tried to shake down Ukrainian President Zelensky to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. He actually misled the public on the threats of COVID. He also, shook down the Georgia Secretary of State for 11,000 votes, tried to cheat the last election in 2020. So from our perspective, from the perspective of Democrats, our best fundraiser and our best organizer is Donald Trump. So this is really just another moment for us to remind the public of what they would be getting with Donald Trump. If there's one thing he is, it's always consistent. He's always scheming and actually trying to launch pressure campaigns and putting his own interests above the interests of the country. So this creates us an opportunity for the party to remind the American public of that.
And still a lot more to play out this year and into the next year as after this arraignment and the political ramifications. We'll be talking to you about all of it over the coming months, I'm sure. Ashley Etienne and Justin Safie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And demonstrators for and against former President Trump gathered outside the Lower Manhattan courthouse today. We'll have more about how they reacted after the charges were unveiled. That's ahead. You're streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
And welcome back to Red and Blue. Demonstrators came to support former President Trump outside New York City's courthouse earlier today, where he pleaded not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Here is some of what they told us.
We love Trump! We love Trump! We love Trump!
Even if the Stormy Daniel thing is true, it's not illegal. Half of Congress and the Senate should be out as well, because I'm sure every one of them has done the same thing.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I think it's a sad day for our country.
Our CBS national correspondents Errol Barnett and Roxana Saberi have been following this for us today and join us now. Errol, I'll start with you. What else did we hear from Trump supporters throughout the day? I know you've been standing outside of Trump Tower.
That's right. Hey there, Caitlin. Hey there, Roxana. Great to see you both. That last woman you just heard from wearing that cowboy hat was actually standing here outside of Trump Tower. And we should remind folks that this location behind me is where Donald Trump really built his name in real estate and established his fame, right, as a reality TV star and businessman. So I certainly was expecting a larger presence of pro-Trump supporters. What we saw were kind of like what you're hearing now, small but loud individuals. There was a truck circling the block with a very loud horn, those pro-Trump MAGA flags on board. But generally, we just saw the public crowding up, really witnessing this spectacle. And so most people were respectful. There was a few kind of yellings from the street. But I think that's also partly because the NYPD has had such a firm security posture here. It was intimidating. It's all decreased by now. You don't see the metal barricades. The public can cross in front of the tower. Tower, and there were even NYPD buses, Caitlin, here on the street obscuring the view. Those have moved as well, so it appears that the NYPD was successful in keeping the emotive temperatures low at this location anyway.
Yeah, Trump Tower is such a fixture of his 2016 campaign. Roxana, you're further downtown in lower Manhattan. What's the scene been like there? I know police had been preparing for anything.
Yeah, Caitlin, we're right across the street from the Manhattan Criminal Court where President Trump came today, where former President Trump came today. And we're at a park where there were, I'd say, dozens of Trump supporters a few hours ago, and they were facing off, separated by these barricades, which have been taken down here as well. They were set up earlier by the NYPD. They were facing off with counter-protesters. We saw a lot of MAGA flags and T-shirts and a flag that said Trump 2024. I spoke with some of the Trump supporters who called the indictment a witch hunt, political, and they said it will only serve to make Trump supporters rally around him even more. It was largely peaceful here. There was a large NYPD presence. For the most part, we just heard a lot of name calling, but it's basically what one New Yorker described to me as New York City normal.
New York City normal indeed, a good reminder. Errol Barnett and Roxana Saberi, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we continue our historic coverage of the first ever criminal arraignment of a former U.S. president. How Donald Trump's attorneys reacted to the charges, that's ahead. You're streaming Red and Blue.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money? If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder. The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
He started out as a fun-loving party boy, but the alcohol got the better of him. What I envisioned was him being in some sort of medical facility. I just thought, what a great candidate for them to learn about the results of alcoholism and what it does to a body. But his body was sold to the military, specifically used as a crash test dummy in a simulated Humvee explosion. I was devastated. I had the box. I don't know if they were his ashes or not. I just held it as tight as I could, and I just told him how sorry I was.
Body Brokers, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream on the free CBS News app, Mondays at 8 p.m.
Here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the insufficiency of this case. And I will say this to you. Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country. Because while everyone is not above the law, no one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that.
And welcome back to Red and Blue. We continue our coverage of the first ever criminal arraignment of a former U.S. president. Those were some of his attorneys after the arraignment today. Former President Trump pleaded not guilty to 34 criminal counts, including felony charges of falsifying business records. Joining us now, CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett with us from Florida, CBS News investigative reporter Graham Cates outside the Manhattan courthouse, CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joining us from the White House, and CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson also joining us. Graham, I want to start with you just because you're outside the courthouse. Can you give us a sense of the timeline in terms of what comes next? When might we see former President Trump in this setting again?
Well, for now, the next hearing on the calendar isn't until 8 months from today, December 4th. But there are a lot of things that could change that schedule. There are motions that have to be filed in response to those motions, and those are all being filed off calendar. So what the judge said was, that's the day that you could expect me. I want you all back here, and you could expect me to rule on your motions. But we know, of course, if there are arguments between the two sides or things that need to be worked out, there could be other hearings in the future. But right now, that's the only thing on the calendar.
And Ed, going to you at the White House, where things have been operating as normal by design, it appears. Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, was asked about the happenings in Manhattan earlier today. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
It's an ongoing case, so we're just not going to comment on the case specifically itself. Look, the president's going to focus on the American people like he does every day. He is not, this is not something that is a focus for him.
So, Ed, it seems like the president is wanting to stay out of the fray, but of course, Donald Trump could be his opponent in 2024.
Yeah, the president himself also ignored questions. I guess we don't have that footage, but he was asked at an event, the one event he held today with science and technology advisors, about this and just literally smiled and laughed it off, continuing his decision, his strategy of not discussing this case publicly, lest it create the appearance of him interfering in any way. But notable that he doesn't even answer questions about whether or not he is in fact interfering, what to try to assuage his critics. We continue to see him focused on presidential things. Yesterday was a trip to Minnesota to discuss implementation of part of his agenda. Today, discussing the very real and emerging threat and intrigue around artificial intelligence with science and technology advisors that advise the White House and his administration on this issue. And now we know he's getting ready for a big trip next week to Northern Ireland and Ireland. At least that's expected. It's still not officially announced, although we just learned a little while ago one thing he's not going to be doing in the coming weeks is going to the coronation of King Charles III. The White House officials telling CBS News the president phoned the king today to say that instead First Lady Jill Biden will lead the U.S. delegation to that coronation. So it's those kinds of things that the current president has been doing while the former president has been in a New York courtroom today. We should say, as they always are, the televisions have been on all day. Aides have had their walls basically wallpapered by the footage, but not necessarily watching closely. They've been in meetings, many of them that we've spoken with. But it's certainly, something they're aware of, even as this administration tries to soldier on.
And Major, over to you, because you're in Mar-a-Lago, where the president is expected to give a campaign speech today, the former president, I should say. You talk to Republicans on Capitol Hill, and many of them would like to be focused on Biden and not these charges, but still they're coming to his defense in this specific case. What does that tell you about kind of the grip that Donald Trump has at the party at this point? I know there's still a long way to go before 2024, but people are making some moves.
Well, I think there are a couple of things worth noting. One, this rallying around former President Trump from some of those people who you would always expect or who have historically rallied to the president's defense. But then look at a statement that was put out by Mitt Romney, Republican from Utah today, this afternoon. Mitt Romney said, "I don't believe Donald Trump is fit to be reelected as president of the United States, but I still have very serious doubts about the efficacy and the legal basis under which these indictments were brought. Sympathetic note from Mitt Romney, not typically someone in the Republican Party who is sympathetic at any level to former President Trump. And there is a line of argument that comes from the Trump universe that this is a day in America which says or proves from their vantage point that the rule of law in this country no longer exists, that this is a hyper-selective, partisan prosecution that undermines the entire concept of American justice. And to Ed O'Keefe's point a moment ago, yes, the White House is trying to stay above the fray, but at some point it might seem worthwhile for the President of the United States, since a predecessor of his is now implicated in this, to offer some observations about whether or not the rule of law is stable or not. Because those in the Trump universe, and there's a new fundraising email that says he's raised $10 million just since the indictment, argues that this prosecution proves justice doesn't exist. Now, that's inflammatory, that's campaign rhetoric. We may hear it again in the podium over my shoulder at about 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. But that is the sentiment that will be part of the American reaction to this. Is this just? Is this proportional? Is this something that someone else who is not a candidate for president or not a former president would be subjected to? That's going to be part of the American conversation. And the Trump campaign wants to exploit the darkest interpretations of that conversation as fast as it possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, Jessica, to that great point, I mean, we did see Alvin Bragg, the district attorney here, come before reporters and defend his credibility here. I mean, talk to us a little bit about how he has been the target of attacks and what kind of impact that's had on this case.
Well, I think it's had, at this point, just an impact outside of the courtroom, obviously. And so the former president and his surrogates have really aggressively attacked Alvin Bragg and have said that there's not just nothing here, but that he is, in fact, weaponizing the legal system. You know, it's an interesting thing to Major's point about, well, you know, that Trump supporters are saying these charges would never be brought if we weren't talking about a candidate for the presidency and ultimately the president. And actually, legally, that's true in this way. What Alvin Bragg is alleging here is a scheme to try and defraud the American public, is a scheme to try to take negative stories out of the public conversation and basically hide from the voters the truth of a presidential candidate and what he is really like. So in that way, he's right. These alleged crimes are unique to somebody who is running for high office. But in terms of, you know, Alvin Bragg defending his credibility and talking about the fact that essentially this isn't his first rodeo and that he has a lot of experience, I think that is a very human reaction to being under attack. And of course, what we need to watch for is what happens in the courtroom and what the judge says when undoubtedly there will be motion practice in this case. And the former president's attorneys will try and get this case thrown out almost immediately. That's what we need to look for, not what Alvin Bragg says necessarily in a press conference.
Yeah, and we will certainly keep an eye on that. And it was interesting to hear the reporting inside the courtroom where there was a acknowledgement of the heightened rhetoric and the social media posts that Donald Trump has been making against Alvin Bragg. We'll have to leave it there. Major Garrett, Graham Cates, Ed O'Keefe, and Jessica Levinson. What a team covering this all. Thank you so much. And a programming note, our John Dickerson will have much more coverage of the history-making arraignment of President Trump later tonight on prime time. His coverage starts at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we'll continue our coverage of the former president's remarks at 8 p.m. right here on CBS News. And we're going to continue on. Let's bring in Matt Bennett now. He's in Washington. He's the co-founder of The Third Way, which is a D.C.-based national political think tank, and was formerly deputy assistant to the president for intergovernmental affairs in the Clinton White House. Matt, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So take us back, kind of from your perspective, having worked inside the White House. How are Democrats and Biden viewing this moment?
I think it's a real opportunity for Biden to create the kind of split screen that he really wants, which is, on the one hand, him doing his job on behalf of the American people, going to places that are, breaking ground to build new factories to create semiconductor chips or clean energy projects, creating amazingly good jobs and pumping all this economic activity into the economy of places like the industrial Midwest. Meanwhile, you have the chaos agent of Trump being arraigned in New York. And what we learned in the midterms of 2022 is Americans are tired of the chaos. They chose mainstream over extreme. And that split screen between those two images of presidents doing very different things, I think really works for Biden.
I mean, given all of that, we also saw how former President Trump, when he was running for president in 2016, was scandal-plagued, and that didn't seem to have an impact. Is the understanding or the feeling now among Democrats is that we've had so much time between then where we have seen some kind of impact or political consequence of some of this?
Nobody thinks that this indictment is going to bring down Donald Trump because we have given up, to your point, we've given up that illusion that anything involving a scandal will necessarily end Trump's career or stop him in his tracks. We thought that would happen multiple times in 2016. We thought during his presidency, some of the incredibly outrageous things that he did might end his career, and none of it did. But collectively, it had an impact. And I think what you saw in the 2020 election was people choosing kind of team normal and Joe Biden over team chaos and Donald Trump. This just adds to that. It's not in and of itself going to be decisive, but I think it is a factor that will weigh on the minds of voters, swing voters who are not committed deeply to either party.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, especially as we have noted before that there are a couple other investigations going on in addition to this. So watching kind of that movement there. You know, you worked under President Clinton. He obviously underwent the scandal involving Monica Lewinsky. These, of course, are completely different cases. But Republicans have been kind of pointing to this case as a case of behavior, not a case of campaign finance. Is there any sort of kind of roadmap that you could imagine going forward here, or any sort of parallels in terms of the perception within the party to scandal of a president?
Well, in the Trump age, Republicans are seemingly immune from shame or charges of hypocrisy. But I was in the Clinton White House during the impeachment, and the charges that his personal conduct should be, the basis for impeachment, and then ultimately for losing his law license and other things, flew pretty thick from Republicans. So obviously they've changed their tune. What I think you'll see is Republicans continuing to attack the district attorney, continuing to question the underlying charges here. They have a right to do that, but I think most people think generally grand juries don't do things for trivial reasons. The DA understood the gravity of arraigning and indicting a former president, and he did it after very careful consideration. That isn't to say that Trump doesn't get a presumption of innocence or that he's guilty of these things, but there's no question that there's at least some question about whether there was criminal conduct here, and I think most people will come to that conclusion.
Yeah, and still a lot to play out. Matt Bennett, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And up next, we'll take a closer look at what we learned from the charges against former President Trump and to see how other Republicans are reacting. You're streaming Red and Blue.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The first U2 show really was on this outside here.
Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and we go person to person with Bono.
Community is at the very heart of U2's music. There was magic, that's all we had.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
If it's important to our nation.
Madam Speaker, I want to talk to you, of course, about abortion.
It's on Face the Nation.
How much money is it that you think you need to go ask Congress for?
The why behind the biggest stories.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
an original documentary from CBS Reports. As the nation of Hungary evolves toward autocracy,
if you define an autocrat as someone that the people can no longer get rid of, even when there are elections, he's definitely an autocrat.
some American conservatives like what they see.
Viktor Orban has done a tremendous job, and you've kept your country safe.
CBS Reports explores their growing alliance.
I have come to Texas. We should unite our forces.
So there are a ton of booths here, a lot of young people here.
And what it means for American democracy.
Prime Minister Orban is being accused of all kinds of things simply because he doesn't toe that liberal line. He stands for Christian conservative values.
To sum up, the mother is a woman, the father is a man, and leave our kids alone. Full stop, end of discussion.
A new conservative alliance, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
We're really excited that we've been honored with the Emmy Award for Outstanding Live News Program. But we know we couldn't have done that without you. So thank you. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7 on CBS.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. Former President Trump has pleaded not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records. Trump is now the first former president to face criminal charges following his arraignment in New York City today. For more, let's bring in Nancy Cordes, Nicole Killian, and Nicole Skanga. Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent, joining me here in New York. Nicole is CBS News congressional correspondent, joining us from Washington. And also in Washington, the other Nicole is CBS News security and justice reporter. Nicole Skanga, I want to start with you because I know you have been poring over all of these documents today. What stood out to you about what we learned today from this indictment?
Yeah, Caitlin, I have them right here. Trump charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records under Article 175 of New York Penal Code. I want to point out to viewers, in case they're confused, we're not talking about 34 different crimes here, but each account represents a separate instance of alleged misconduct here. And the indictment has some new information, although we did know the general contours. False entries into the Trump organization's ledger, checks paid to, Cohen back in 2017, Michael Cohen, the former president's then attorney, that are falsified. They're called reimbursements for legal services. Of course, they're not. Essentially, sort of painting this 2-year scheme to catch and kill, identify and suppress negative information, blocking or potentially blocking, then candidate Trump's road to the White House. One new detail that was interesting, Caitlin, a recorded conversation reveals Cohen created a shell company to help make one payment after having a conversation with Trump himself. And in that audio recording, the court documents alleging that, Mr. Trump himself came up with the number for the payment, $150,000. But in this case, prosecutors are going to have to prove that Mr. Trump is guilty of maintaining false business records with an intent to hide some of these payments in the days running up to the 2016 election.
And Nicole, as you've been talking, we've been showing the photos that we have of Trump inside the courtroom. Of course, cameras weren't allowed, but he is stone-faced, and we saw him exit the room as well. And he was also, seeming to be in a somber moment. I'm curious kind of what you make of that. And also, has he been saying anything on social media?
Yeah, so the former president did head to his social media site, Truth Social, as he was on his way to the courthouse, writing, heading to Lower Manhattan. The courthouse seems so surreal. Wow, they're going to arrest me. He went on to say he can't believe this is happening in America. But he was, very brief, entering his plea of not guilty at the courthouse, not stopping to make any statement to reporters. Some potentially, speculation that there were security concerns around a formal statement that he could have made in New York. We do know that he is addressing supporters later tonight in Mar-a-Lago, perhaps more of Trump country, to be back in his home state of Florida.
Yeah, and we know that he will be doing so without a gag order, as we learned today. Nicole Killian, I want to go to you because on Capitol Hill today, or outside Capitol Hill, I should say, because they're not in session, but we heard from House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, others reacting to this arraignment today. Let's take a listen.
Today is a bad day for all of us. Today, American politics crosses a line that it's never going to come back from. After today, especially on the basis of how ridiculous these charges are, after today, every prosecutor in America that wants to make a name for themselves now is going to have permission to basically go after someone in the other party.
This is an individual that's a DA of a borough. This isn't a state attorney general. This is something that's been looked at before. And to take it to this level, really to campaign and say you want to indict the president and go in and use a system the way he is, I think it's wrong for everybody involved.
Well, none of this is surprising, of course. These are the reactions that we heard before we actually saw the counts in the indictment. But what does this tell you about kind of how Republicans are reacting to this, kind of coming to Trump's defense, and also, in charge of committees on Capitol Hill calling for investigations?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for the most part, Republicans have been operating in lockstep on this, as they have, when the former president has faced other difficulties. I mean, let's not forget, especially for those of us who have covered Capitol Hill, Nancy included, being on the Senate. I mean, the former president has gone through 2 impeachments and, of course, the January 6th Select Committee, an investigation, which ended up in criminal referral to the Justice Department, which is still under investigation. So, I mean, this is something that has been ongoing for the former president for some time in different iterations with different, facts and different cases, of course. But in each of those instances, in many cases, we have seen Republicans rally to his defense. What's interesting, I think, is, hearkening back to the impeachment, most recently, that second impeachment with respect to January 6th, you have some Republicans who voted to impeach the former president, like Mitt Romney, like Bill Cassidy, and others who are actually now being somewhat critical of this Manhattan DA. Mitt Romney, in his statement today, saying, "I believe President Trump's character and conduct make him unfit for office. Even so, I believe the New York prosecutor has stretched to reach felony criminal charges in order to fit a political agenda," which is pretty notable because certainly Mitt Romney is not one to mince his words when it comes to the former president. Again, you have Bill Cassidy over the weekend, someone, again, who voted to impeach the former president, who has called this political theater. So on this one, we are seeing Republicans, for the most part, being very critical of this Manhattan DA. But yet there is some daylight among Republicans, more notably when we look at the 2024 presidential race and campaign. And of course, we've seen a number of potential hopefuls, people who have not yet announced, like former Governor Ron DeSantis, who have supported the former president thus far as he navigates this criminal process. But you also have people like Asa Hutchinson, who came out over the weekend announcing that he is running for 2024 for the White House, and saying that he will, he believes that the former president should withdraw from the race. So there is a little bit of a chasm between Republicans, but for the most part, they are defending him, at least for now, and we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, Nancy, to that point, at least for now, we talk a lot about how Donald Trump is often immune to controversy, but he's faced political consequences for his actions. I mean, he lost the presidential election. Republicans lost the Senate. They underperformed in the midterms. As we're looking to 2024, I mean, it's no sure thing that he can win again.
Caitlin, I've been so surprised by the number of Trump
opponents who you hear kind of wringing their hands and saying, but this is helping him. He's raising money. How is he getting indicted? And it's helping him. We don't know if it's helping him. The race is another 19 months until it's over, which is, you know, a little scary to think about now. But, you know, there's no indication right now that the people who are giving money to him, for example, are new supporters, which is what he needs. He didn't have enough supporters in 2020. He needs to grow his base. If the people who are giving to him would have been donating anyway, then it's kind of a wash. There's no indication that this is going to endear him to independence, which is what he would need in order to have a better showing in 2024 than he did in 2020.
And a lot of Republicans who want to run against Biden and not want to talk about these kind of controversies heading into 2024. I think we have to leave it there. So good to see you, Nancy, Nicole, and Nicole. Thank you all so much for joining us. And that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.